I'm thrilled to be able to introduce to you our panel of 5 inspiring, impactful women who between them bring decades of experience across sectors and a track record of working with and leading some incredible organisations and missions. They represent a wide spectrum of organisation experience from grassroots community to government to international NGOs and multinational private sector companies. I think we can safely say they bring experience of all elements of the social impact sector, from governance and volunteering to fundraising, HR, civil rights, operations and advocacy. I want to begin by introducing Najwa Abdallah, CEO of AMNA, Vice Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee and member of the Safeguarding Committee at the International Rescue Committee. Born in Lebanon during the Civil War, Najwa has turned her experience of growing up in poverty during severe conflict into a career spanning the international development and humanitarian sector, and now to her current role at AMNA, where she endeavours to build a global healing network. She has deep expertise in financial management while working for organisations such as PLAN, the Norwegian Refugee Council, Save the Children International and Mercy Corps, and has covered everything from emergency finance to compliance, granting. You name the finance, she built the belt it's under, and brings an experience of incredible NED portfolio to boot. Our next panellist is Claire Eadington, the CEO of the Patchwork Foundation, a charity committed to strengthening democracy, focused on communities and young individuals that are traditionally underrepresented. Claire has held roles in government as National Operations Director at Natural England, Head of Data Portfolio at the Central Digital and Data Office after an early career in event management and business support for a variety of charities and arts organisations and as a professional musician. She graduated from Patchwork's Masterclass program for future leaders and has shared her own experience of social mobility in relation to growing up in an economically deprived area and with limited aspirations and ambitions for young people. She's passionate about providing opportunities for individuals regardless of their background. Our third panellist of the evening is Farah Nazeer, CEO of Women's Aid UK. Farah has been committed to advocating for those without privilege, oppressed, or without the means to platform themselves. A thread throughout her career has always been leveraging influence to support women and girls. Her experience spans geographies, societies, and has always been in aid of fighting the good fight. Much of her work has been on women's rights, with a track record in policy and public campaigning at local, national, and international levels. Next, I want to introduce Ebele Okobi, CEO of the New Humanitarians, and in her own words, an angelic troublemaker, which I know will resonate with many of us here tonight. I know it does for me, at least. Ebele's career spans tech, consumer brands, civil society and law. She's also a patron of the arts with a focus on art as a liberation practice. Last but by no means least, we have our final panellist, who is an advocate, activist and campaigner, Saba Shafi, CEO of the Advocacy Academy. She's experienced as a management consultant, was one of the founding organisers of #CharitySoWhite, founder of a network for women of colour in impact leadership, treasurer of Citizens UK and governor of the Belham. Saba has represented, engaged with and given space to campaigns spanning decolonisation to climate justice. She, like many of our panel, represents when mission and value alignment become a core principle of leadership. And lastly, we have our chair, the Social Impact and Environment Practices' own regional head for UK and MENA, Shivani Smith, which is fitting considering she has likely chaired nearly every board in the charity space in the UK. Shivani has served as chair of the Advocacy Academy, Kalisa, #CharitySoWhite, and was a trustee of Street Kids International. Those who know Shivani know how humble, yet quick, perceptive and shrewd she can be. I can think of no other person fit enough for the task of really getting to the crux of what it means to govern with our panel. So now, if you would all like to join me in giving a huge and welcoming round of applause to said panel, I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you very much, Libby, and thank you all for coming, and absolutely thank you, a huge amount to all of you. I've had the pleasure of speaking to all of you individually over the last few weeks just to prep for this event, but Saba has obviously had way too much time speaking to me over many years, so I haven't pestered her. Today, we have so much to go through, and we're not going to be able to get through everything. But what we do want to do is just touch on some of the themes which some of you mentioned, but also we had questions coming in from the audience. And I think there's a real appetite for hearing about what goes right, what goes wrong, what you have learned the hard way, what you would pass on as advice to others through your own reflections. So those are some of the themes that we'd love to explore with you. We'll have about 50 minutes to hear from you, and then 20 minutes to hear from you as well. We know you have lots of questions to ask as well. So I'm just going to dive in with, I guess, the question that just sets the scene a little bit about what is maybe one defining moment or defining experience that you had, which you think kind of characterizes your leadership journey? And maybe, Najwa, we can start with you and work our way around. And if you could use the mics, please.
It was a sad event when the woman who was supposed to be my boss sadly had brain injury, and I had to take up her role at a very short pace. And that impacted my outlook on life, but also on work and leadership. And also like give the emphasis and focus on well-being and balance between life and work and the stress from work that is crucial to be able to carry on and deliver.
Thank you, Najwa. Farah?
I think it was a moment where a campaign was won that made me believe that campaigns can be won and you can break down systems. And this particular campaign was when I was at the Women's Institute, which most people consign to being, Middle England and, tweed and twin sets and pearls, and people don't get out, they don't march, they don't do anything. But, I didn't really believe that. And then there was this huge campaign about food packaging and the amount of environmental sort of toxicity within the food packaging, both to humans and to the environment. And no one believed that you could change the way that big supermarkets, the big five, would think. And together with these women who people sort of consigned to being grandmothers and, people that just wouldn't engage, we came up with a campaign whereby they would, on one day, all 7,500 of them would take their packaging back in clear plastic bags and just dump it on supermarket doorsteps. And it happened, and they did it, and it got the most coverage you could ever imagine of any campaign that I've ever been part of, partly because it was these sort of people that are consigned to not being activists, and they were true activists, and because it managed to change the way that supermarkets package their food in a really radical way, in a non-competitive way. And that sort of made me think, actually, the things that people think can't be done can be done, and you can change things. And it's not the biggest change in the world, but it led to lots of other changes. And it empowered those women to think, actually, if they see something, they can prosecute it to an outcome. And I think that's really sort of inspired the way that I try and inspire my teams, and the way that I sort of focus on impact and making things happen.
I think with me, it's about when you find yourself in a leadership position, you go, wow, the change has got my name on it. And I was reflecting on this question, and actually it was more like a series of glimmers kind of on my way through when I've just connected with somebody, and it might have been a manager, but it might also have been someone on that exec team that I supported when I was a chief of staff that said, you know what, Claire, you really get this. And those little glimmers where someone sees you for who you are and gives you that permission to do it your way, and not to have to be able to do it the way the person before did it and step into those shoes, but kind of find that within yourself. Because I think some of the situations that we'll all find ourselves in on a daily basis, you can't just emulate what someone else has done, you've got to find it within yourself. And I couldn't give all that credit to kind of one person or one moment in my career, but definitely just those small moments where you realise that you're not just the person that is doing whatever it is you're doing, but actually you do have that ability to lead people with you through change and kind of foster that belief.
Thanks, Claire.
I really did struggle with the framing of like one defining movement, Shivani. I think for me, I find that the moments that were coming to mind were when repeated lessons finally crystallized in my mind. And the one that really rings true is that, as a campaigner, as somebody who comes, who's experienced of oppression living in the UK, like oftentimes this understanding of what power is and what power isn't, to have a position of power can make people feel very icky, right? You're not sure what you're supposed to do with that. But I've realized, working with different people with lived experience in the UK primarily, I really believe that in order to make change happen, we have to appreciate that it's not just the overuse of power where abuse is potentially rife, but that the underuse of the power that we have is also where there is potential for abuse. And if we don't lean into our positions, we don't lean into leadership moments, we don't take the responsibility, whatever the boundaries of the responsibilities that we hold, then we are guilty of abusing the responsibilities that we have. And I tried to hold that very true once it finally landed home for me after many lessons learned, that you have to lean into the power that you're given if you're going to make change happen.
Thanks.
Hi, I think like Saba, I struggled a little bit only because I've, in almost 30 years of a career, I've had multiple moments. But I'll talk about the most recent one because it's quite relevant. So I was introduced as the CEO of the New Humanitarian, but I'm no longer the CEO of the New Humanitarian, actually, as of last week. And that, for me, was a very specific moment. And there are a couple of things there. So one, for me, it's very important to, what is the hill that you're going to die on? And so it's incredible for me. I'm a veteran dyer on hills. So it's something that I'm not afraid of. But I think that there's something in leadership. The more senior you get, I think sometimes there's a sense that, well, no, if I'm really, really senior, there'll be less hills. But no, for me, I found that there were more hills. And for me, it was a lesson about what is most important to me. And one of the things I've always been, I never compromise on is safety and joy in a workplace. And so if I'm in a position of power, if I'm in a position where I can guarantee safety and joy, that's a decision I'm going to make. And I think back to the meeting after I made the decision that I made in terms of firing people, and an employee who was affected said, "This is the first time since I started at this organization that I felt safe." And for me, that made that hill absolutely worth dying on.
Thank you so much. I think there's lots of stuff there that we'd like to come back on, and certainly the hills that you've all died on, because having had those conversations with each one of you, I know you've all had that experience as well. But one of the themes of today is obviously the leadership journey. So I was wondering if you could speak about what you were doing before you became a CEO. What was that transition like? What were you afraid of, or what were you confident about? Because I think some things you feel absolutely ready for, and some things like, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to do this. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what was the step before CEO. And maybe, Claire, we can start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I've had a bit of a squiggly career. The 9 years before I joined Patchwork, I worked for the government in a variety of roles. I was a chief of staff. I worked on board governance. I ran crisis projects. I did large-scale delivery. I did strategy in the centre, speaking languages only civil servants understand, and maybe management consultants. And before that, I worked in the arts and in small organisations. So in terms of my journey, I think the conversations we had around the Patchwork kind of appointment process, I knew I had the tools in the box. They'd all come from slightly different places. It was like one of those games where you have to walk around a land finding things in chests. And I was like, oh no, I could meet a stakeholder and ask them for money. And I could tell the board what they need in terms of governance. And I can make sure the team are engaged. And yes, I can build a team and I can lead people through change. And they've all come from slightly different places. And I think I've got them all. I think the advice I'd maybe give myself now is make sure you've also got some headroom, so you're not called on to use, your hammer and your screwdriver and your power drill at the same time, while things are kind of coming from 8 different directions, because maybe that's something that requires a bit more muscle memory. But kind of, I stepped back into the charity sector from government, which is a big leap in some ways. We all know the civil service brings with it all sorts of security and longevity for those people who want it. I think I'm young enough to maybe go back in the future if that's something where my squiggle might take me next. But having worked with arts organisations and non-profits in the past, I knew what some of the pros and cons of that kind of world was. Hugely passionate people, you get that in the civil service as well. Needing to be entrepreneurial and having to deal with really big fluxes in terms of income and curveballs that have a real impact on the bottom line, which in government you can be protected from in a way that businesses and charities just aren't. But then I'd been a freelancer for 8 years earlier in my career when I was a performer. So there was a tool in the box for it. And it was just going to have to be a new way of putting all those things into practice. But then there were also ways that things would be more comfortable. So I went from having a team of hundreds to a team of 5, including myself. So some very different kind of things to deal with.
Thanks, Claire. Saba, do you want to?
So I feel like people were being very discreet by saying that I was a management consultant. I used to work in corporate restructuring, which is about the bluntest, most capitalist end of management consulting. And so the transition from that into a radical social justice-driven campaigning organization was quite stark. What I did know from a very early sort of age, I was very much always eager to take on leadership responsibilities, and like with this sort of a big breadth of corporate experience in different spaces, working in different campaigning groups over that time, I felt like I had a broad skill set and a confidence in like moving in to do different things. All that said, nothing about that not sure if I actively thought I'm ready to be a CEO. I became a CEO, and then I wondered whether I was ready for it, and whether I had done enough thinking about whether I was ready for it at that time. I think I'm still thinking about it a little bit, and I think that there is something very different about the idea of leadership and associating it with the position of a CEO. I think there are lots of different roles and like types of CEOs that can exist, and not all of them mold to the idea of a leader in the same way that we might want them to or expect them to. I think that that transition for me came from like just moving up through the ranks in a very deliberate way in many ways, almost like a very boring transition to CEO. That's me.
Thanks, Eva. Before we move on to something else, there was one thing we talked about, and given what you've just shared about New Humanitarian, we talked about how when you are looking for roles, it's a two-way process, and there are questions which we should all be asking. And I was wondering if you could comment on maybe one question you wish you had asked before you took on your current role. And maybe I'll start with you, because this is something that we were talking about a lot.
So I think a lot of organizations bring you in because they say they want transformational change, or they say there's a way that we've been engaging and we want to do something very different. And so your experience is completely aligned with the change that we want. So in my case, even though I've had a lot of different experiences, one of the red threads is I love leading people. And by that, I mean not like being the boss, although that's great too, but like how is it that you bring the best out of people? The question that I would have asked is, this change that you say that you want to have, do you actually want it? Like, do you know what it actually looks like? So for example, if you want massive cultural change, that's not something that just kind of happens. There's things that you have to remove in order for that change to happen. So I think I would have asked much more direct questions about, when you're talking about change, what does that look like for you? And when I talk about my vision for change, do you know what that entails? Do you know what that means, and are you guys ready for it? So,
thank you. Farah, do you want to comment on this as well?
Well, I think I was drawn to the potential and what I wanted to happen on the back of landing this job, to sort of serve more survivors, to see more women and children supported away from domestic abuse. What I didn't think about at the time was perhaps what the responsibility would be more broadly internally within an organisation to make that happen, because I guess I've come from a campaigning and policy background, and I was looking outwards and thinking about leadership from that perspective. I wasn't thinking about, financial infrastructure. I wasn't thinking about, whether the whether the security, the IT security is strong enough, and whether the doors need changing on the on the office block, how you get people back to work over COVID. These are things that I had been thinking about when I was director at ActionAid, but there were lots of other people to also take part in that thinking and that decision making. And it also had a very feminist sort of leadership culture. So decisions were consensual, which often meant things never got done. But at least there was an attempt to come to common ground. So I really wish I'd asked about the infrastructure of the organisation. And I really wish I'd asked about a bit more about the leadership team, and a bit more about not dissimilar to your point. The change that you're talking about, do you really want the consequences of that change? I mean, I like the sound of it, but do you? And are you willing to stomach what that means for an organisation and its culture?
Najwa, can you come in on this as well, please?
I'm new to my role as CEO for AMNA, and I was very lucky that the board and the founder were very transparent in their communication. So I feel like we got this alignment from day one. They knew that it's the first time I'm a CEO, so I'm going on a learning curve and the learning curve at the same time, and they are very supportive for that. So it was good that we had this very transparent conversation from day one. They were very honest, very open about things, and we managed to build this trust and relationship, and we continue to do so. So I feel like until now, I don't have unanswered questions or questions that I wish I asked before.
I'd love to come back to the whole point about being a first-time CEO and what onboarding should look like when you take on that role, and what support you should have from other SLT members or the board. Just wondering if you could talk about that. Maybe Farah, you'd like to come in on this, and then Claire.
I'm fortunate in that I had a very supportive chair and a very supportive board, and continue to. I think the challenge is sometimes whether boards have truly thought through the implications of what they want, which is sort of a bit different to being supportive. I came into Women's Aid and there wasn't a management team in place, and the infrastructure was not perhaps as robust as it needed to be. So it's very safe for survivors and on the sort of service delivery side, but internally some of the infrastructure was just hadn't been renewed for the 50 years of its existence. And I think a lot of people going into CEO roles are finding that, particularly with these older charities that have just been there, been serving, all the funding's been put to the external, but it hasn't sort of tended its own internal garden. And you see that in sort of the you see that in some of the frustrations that staff might have. You see that in sort of the sustainability sort of plans of the organisation. So I guess in terms of induction, it would have been good to perhaps had a bit more of a systematic introduction to how the organisation works. But I'm not always sure that boards always know as much as they should with regards to how an organisation works. And, it was one of the things that really drove me to ensure that whatever happens and whatever the challenges and options might be, I certainly will always be incredibly transparent with my board, because I think it pays huge dividends if you've got a board that is willing to work with you and is engaged and has the same mission. Perhaps if I had a board more like the one you're describing, you might have a different tactic. But I think where you have alignment, it's really important to be very transparent and ask for help when you want it and need it.
Thanks, Perrett. Claire.
I'm wondering whether a bit like humans, it's at the beginning and later on in our lives that we need the most care and attention, because I lead quite a young organisation and we've been incorporated as a charity for 6 years, but that's very much been the growth kind of curve. And I really resonate with a lot of what you say, Farah, because it's not that I could have sat still for a week and observed enough things to work out how things worked. It was that I came in and went, okay, so how does this work? And someone said, oh, we just kind of wait until then we just make it happen, and we don't. And we had driven everything to the front line because that was all we did. And the previous chief exec had been the first employee of the organisation. And so which buttons you press in Xero to get your cash flow was in their head, which was the right way to do it for the last 6 years. And I'm sharing this with you now because I've now written it all down, so we're okay. But I think there is something about your board needing to know enough about kind of, does somebody know how this works, and are we resilient, and what's our kind of business continuity? Where's the playbook for us? And I run an organisation with a 6-figure turnover and less than half a dozen staff. It's really not difficult to write that stuff down, and we're a long way towards doing that now, and that's great. But your board will only know what they understand and what they ask about, and what the answers to those questions that they're given. I have a wonderful board. They're very strategic. They, between them, kind of just do all these amazing, huge things in their other parts of their life. And that means we have some amazing strategic direction, and I also have access to some excellent support from their teams when I need it. However, I've had some quite quick recommendations back to them about this is how you need to get under the bonnet of this organisation to make sure that you are the right stewards for this organisation. And although we have really high aspirations, and therefore we have a very strategic board, we're actually quite a small org, and that means that actually we need quite a hands-on sort of support. So maybe we also need some trustees who are mid-career, who don't mind sitting down with the team and seeing how things are. So I think I'm on a bit of a journey with my board to help them understand that we can be really ambitious, and we might also just be a small organisation at the same time, and that's okay. And that's not to say that we're not achieving, because we achieve amazing things. And so in terms of what does a perfect onboarding look like, I think, what would I repeat from my onboarding? I spent loads of time with stakeholders and our participants and our alumni and heard what everybody thought. I also just needed a pack on day one that said, like, this is what you need to do, rather than having to kind of go and, like, create my own adventure. But I do think if you're a leader of a small organisation, for me to make that somebody's job would mean taking somebody off the front line. And they're really hard decisions to make. And we don't pay people loads of money in the charity sector, so I also can't say, we have that startup energy, please go and work 20 hours a day to make sure you do all these extra things alongside your job. So you have to accept that your progress will be a bit slower, but you will get there. If you've got to just do the boring stuff first, then get to the cool stuff. And I think kind of balance the passion with enough kind of boring routes to make it all match.
Thank you. Speaking of the charity sector, we know that there's probably never been a tougher time for the sector. Things are going wrong all the time, and it's really difficult. So one of the things we talk a lot to leaders about is navigating the challenges. What would be great to hear from you is where you've had to deal with a challenge, a setback, a failure, and what's that been like? How have you dealt with it? How have you overcome it? How have you learned from it? Najwa, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, we're faced with the challenges every day. At the moment, it's mainly around the fundraising because, as you know, it's a very difficult situation. So we're trying how to leverage the expertise that we have within the team and make sure that we continue to make sure we secure the funding. And the toughest part I'm finding myself in is, like, you're the ultimate responsible person for the sustainability of the organization. And it's unethical, like from my perspective, to hire people if you're not sure that you are able to retain them. But at the same time, you can't bring in more money if you don't have the team to do that work. So getting the right balance between hiring the resources that you need to scale up as an organization and continue the delivery of the program, and at the same time, securing the funds and the sustainability of the organization. Thank you.
Saba?
I think, like, very similarly, it's a very tough time at the moment for a number of charities. We were in a position where we very sadly had to let go of a number of staff, and I think there was. I think the biggest challenge I faced was in that moment. There were so many things that were happening. We had grown very fast and sort of somehow had reached this moment where we were also we couldn't grow any further. And it's a really difficult thing to sort of be able to sit down with your staff team and say, we made some choices, they made sense at the time. And maybe we could have done them differently, but we now have to make these new choices now and be open and honest. And I'd say not a specific challenge, but more a challenging time over the last few months has been to grapple with that decision that we make and to sort of lead the team through that. The biggest thing that I realized through that was I don't ask for enough help from the people around me. And I think for me that is asking for help from my senior leadership team. I think there's a default I know that I've begun to notice that I lean into, which is that I will try and figure it out myself because I want to sort of hold that burden. And even when I know that that's not a great instinct to lean towards, I think I'm recognizing that and knowing what it means to genuinely trust people, while also holding them to a standard that you would want them to do, to sort of work at, is a challenging sort of tension to continue to hold. And it isn't something that you always want to do when you're tired, and when you think you can do it yourself. And I think for me, there's that challenge of going from when you're the only person. We're a youth organisation, so when you're the person who runs the cash flow statement, puts up the posters and the blue tacks, runs this training, does the people management, to sort of stepping away from that over a short period of time, it's definitely challenging. For me, there's asking for help in terms of like true delegation, and I feel like that's been a journey, but a really beautiful one, to sort of come into a place of like, no, it is a wonderful thing to be able to generally like shove off responsibility and like begin to truly think about how to create roles that are more meaningful for everybody in the organisation. But the other side of that is asking for help in the sector. I think there was a sense of like embarrassment. I really felt a sense of like embarrassment and shame, and I think it was really complicated to have to grapple through that. I think that as you know, I am a relatively, I mean, well, I work with 16-year-olds who think that I'm like close to death all the time. So I'm struggling to say the word relatively young for some reason, but like relatively young leader, who are like, and I think, you know, one of my big experiences is this sense of, I've often felt that there is a higher degree of scrutiny on the work that I do, from within the sector, from other people, both from people within my own communities, sort of the expectation, the hope, the desire to sort of get it all done well, but also from sort of my peers. And I had this sense of real shame of like, what does it mean to ask people for help and to like admit and to sort of show and to express that need? And that was a real challenge that I faced. And really naming that for myself, even now, is a bit hard. But recognizing that the only way, and like, what does it sort of, I had to really come to grips and come to sort of recognize that part of the role and the need to do the work that I was going to do required me to ask for that help, even if it was going to be hard, because it was important for me, my well-being, and for the health of the organization as well.
Thanks, Saba. Thank you for sharing that. Staying on team, one of the things that came up with all of our conversations was the challenges of managing team, managing a staff, managing people, all of that piece. And Ebele, coming back to your point around the safety and the joy, I know, Najwa, obviously you talk about joy and belonging as well. So wondering, as a leader, what do you need from your team, and what do you find that your team is looking to you for? What are the kind of evolving expectations?
Can I answer that? But then don't be mad. Can I actually answer? So there's a question about the board, about what the board can do with transitions. And could I just say a couple things, just because I think it's really important? So one of my favorite movies is The Godfather, which betrays my age. And there's a point, I can't remember if it was only 1 and 2. 3 is trash. But like, there was one, I can't remember if it was 1 or 2. That's not controversial, it's factual. No, but there was one where they're going to the mattresses. And so Tom Hagen, who is their lawyer, he's like, I can't go with you because I need a wartime consigliere. This is very long, I'm gonna land this plane. But the thing around some boards is that when you're bringing in a new CEO, the board as it's constituted may not be the board for a new CEO, because you need a board who's really understands transition and can support through transition. So one of the biggest things is, before that process starts, really the board looking at itself and saying, do we have the skill set that we need that will allow us to support a transformational CEO? And if you don't have it, getting people on that board, I think that's crucial. The other piece around transition is that it costs money. I mean, it just does, and you may not identify what it is. And so making sure that you have a kind of budget that allows for a little bit of flexibility, because you need that. The other thing is that often the board is not, they're supposed to be helping with the transition, but they might not have the skill set to do it, or to your point, the information to do it. And so it may mean that if you have an amazing HR person, then you have to empower them to do that work. Or it may be that you bring someone in to do that. And the last thing is that sometimes the type of transition is really important. If you have a founder CEO and you're transitioning from a founder, that has its own specific issues. And there's a very desperate need for the board to understand how to manage that very specific transition, how to support the founder CEO out, and how to put really clear boundaries around what that transition looks like. And all of those things are very, very important. I learned them in many different ways. I've been on boards, and so I've been a board member through it, but now being on the other side of it, I see how important it is. Now, in terms of team, team to me is one of the reasons, like that's why I manage. Like I love managing because I love leading teams. And for me, when I think about what the team needs from me, I think of psychological safety. That to me is one of the most important things. Being someone who's very transparent about, I think my role is to create an environment where people can grow in their careers and where people can align mission and purpose and joy with what it is that they do. I also see my role as setting that kind of tone. I think often, and one of the things I noticed within the charity sector, there's a sense that you should be, that there's a privilege to do these jobs. That is true. Or that because it's mission driven, that is also true. That sort of, not any kind of behavior, that there isn't as much care paid or attention paid to what people's experiences are like, because the work is so important, the mission is so important. And I think it is desperately critical within this space that people take responsibility as leaders for the well-being of it, and not just the sense, well, you're doing good work, so you're just lucky to be here, and you've got this mission, and so you can work yourselves into the ground. So I see that as a huge part of my role, to set that particular tone, to let people know that managing in any organization I lead is one of the most important things you do. It's a sacred trust, and you hold people's careers and hopes and dreams in your hands, and that is critically important. And what I expect and want from teams is transparency. And by transparency, I mean I'm always asking for feedback, and feedback not in a superficial way, but how am I doing? But actually, what is it that you're looking for? Different teams and different people require different things, and having the openness to ask and the willingness to be wrong. And one of the things I also do, and I'll stop, because one of my favorite topics is being really open about the things I'm not good at. So really being open about, these are things, this I'm bad at this. Everyone knows I'm terrible at calendar management. Everyone knows I'm going to be late. And accepting and embracing those things and saying, these are things I'm bad at, because I also want to create an environment where people know that being not great at some things is not a life killer. Do you know what I mean? And that being transparent around what you're not good at allows you to accept help in a way that's actually quite empowering, and allows you to accept help in a way that allows people to step into their strengths, and that you can surround yourself with people who are good in the ways that you're not. And so creating an environment where people know that everything's a team effort, that you as a leader are not sort of the important one and everyone's sort of your support staff, that you work as a collective. So,
Thank you. Farah, can I bring you in on the staff piece? What have your observations been around staff dynamics, staff management?
I think it perhaps goes back to some of the challenges within the charity sector. So, it breaks my heart on a regular basis that we can't afford our staff the same cost of living sort of uplifts as I see some of my friends and colleagues in the private sector get, or in the public sector get. And they work incredibly hard and they give so much of themselves to the cause, but we can't compensate them in the same way. So, I think what we then have to do is think of more creative ways to reflect gratitude and appreciation for everything they do. But in a cost of living crisis, that only goes so far. So how do you square that circle is quite a big sort of question on my mind. And then how do you really invest in the development of your staff team when actually Women's Aid isn't that big, it's 100 people, but it's cut across many different areas, when there's not sort of obvious opportunities upwards, and when you're in a cost of living crisis, people are wanting opportunities upwards because they can see that as a way of improving their quality of life, and rightly so. So I think that's probably the biggest tension that we have, particularly given the fact that loads of donors are pulling back from the way that they used to fund, domestic abuse charities and other charities during COVID. So I think there is an issue that I'm really grappling with as to how we keep our people inspired and happy. How you're transparent, but sometimes being too transparent can cause unnecessary alarm. So how do you hold that tension? Because actually in these roles, that's your tension, that's your burden to bear, I think, whilst also being sort of clear about direction of travel and so on. I mean, we haven't been hugely hit, but if this current climate continues, all charities will find themselves having to make really difficult decisions. I think there's also something around expectations. I've had to really work hard to educate myself. You know, I come from a fairly sort of, relatively deprived background. I was brought up in Mauritius, you know, with the sort of whites-only clubs and experienced significant amounts of racism. So to come here, when I came here, I was sort of very young, and I was grateful to have a job. But I look back on that and think, oh my God, your expectations were so low. But the people that now are in my team have much higher expectations, and absolutely rightly so. But again, I'm not sure how in these such constrained times, when those expectations translate to a monetary value, how we properly sort of engage with those expectations. So I think these are the things that I think certainly I'm grappling with, and I think a lot of CEOs in the Vogue sector are grappling with too. Just how do we really recognise and reward our staff within our constrained environments?
Thanks, Farah. I'm going to switch gears, and I'd like all of you to come in on this, which is, Claire, you mentioned the CEO is actually the Chief Everything Officer, which I love. And I was wondering, out of all the things, maybe if you could all pick something that you're particularly proud of, something that you really celebrate, that you have done, and you want to celebrate about what you've been able to achieve in your roles. And maybe, Najwa, we can start with you and work our way around.
Before I answer this question, can I make a comment about the
Yeah.
board? One of the sayings is the board are people who do not know each other, and they meet 4 times a year to make the most important decisions, and that impact people's life and careers. So, yeah, to your point, like, it's really important to manage the board and not expect that the board will be managing us. It's really important relation to manage. And to your question about the things that I want to celebrate, at AMNA, our ultimate goal is that people who have experienced heartbreak and traumas, that they can re-experience and reawaken joy, and they feel belonging to the place, to their new community and to their new home. And this is what we want to achieve, both for the people we serve, but also for our staff, that they feel joy and happiness in the work that they do, and to feel like that they are heard, that they are included, that they are treated in a fair and equal way. And this is what I feel like I'm celebrating. We were able to grow our team from 15 to 21 as of today, and we're having 6 additional joining, and we're bringing in the people from around the world, and was very happy that we are treating them with equity and in a fair way, to make sure that our reward system, as you alluded, is equitable and fair to everyone, and bring in the global skills and utilize their skills and knowledge from different countries. And it is a very challenging thing to come up with an equitable pay reward for everyone, especially they are based in different countries with different cost of living situations. So this is something I feel very proud of, that we hired employer of record to employ people, so they are not on a consultancy contract, and to make sure that their financial well-being, so it's not only now, but for the future, that they have pension, they have insurance. So I feel like very proud of being able to take well care of our team.
Thank you, Najwa. Farah?
Thank you. I was very carried away in your description of what you do. It's really beautiful. Well, I'm really proud, actually, very similarly, that we've managed to put in place what I think is a really powerful pay and benefits scheme, which kind of answers some of the challenges that I articulated. So how can you reward people financially, but then reward them sort of spiritually, and ensure that they, love being in their jobs, and, give them what development we can do, try and think about mentorship and exchanges and well-being offers. And we've managed to do that through attracting lots of sort of interventions that would cost us, hundreds of thousands of pounds for free for the charity. So that's been an incredible journey to get that in, and that's, I think that will make a really big difference to our staffing team. And for survivors and sort of the women and children that we serve, we discovered through a piece of research we did last year, because of the challenges of the cost of living, women and children were no longer able to leave abusers because they couldn't pull together the £200, £200 to £500 they needed to escape. So we managed to take this to the Home Office. But, my team managed to do such a brilliant job of persuading the Home Office to put in place a fund which we just distribute directly to survivors who want to escape abusive relationships. And now I think we've managed to support thousands of women and children in a really direct, concerted way to leave abusers. And it's set up a new, flexible, more funding model for the third sector, which I think is really exciting.
Thank you, Farah.
So I had a moment over the Christmas holidays where I'd come in October and I looked under the bonnet and it wasn't quite what I thought it might be. And I had to have a moment where I was like, if this organisation fails, it is not your fault. You might have done absolutely everything to the best of your ability and 8 other people could have tried. And the climate is what it is. We're probably all going to at some point today say that it's a terrible time to be a charity. And you can make the culture better and you can engage all the staff and you can do all those things. And in 2 years' time, this still might not be a great story. And that's not going to be our story. We're in great shape and we found some more money and there's a great ending. But I just had this moment where I was like, you could do all of your best things and this still might look really from the outside. And I think for me, sticking with it and like just kind of staying in the moment and coming every day and being like, okay, what can I do today? I think when you're a small organisation, you can see the totality of your success or failure every day. I can't write out to 7 people on my SLT and say, what's your team delivered this week and put it in a nice little package to the board. My Friday 5 email to my board has 5 things that I have either done or someone I manage has done in that 5-day period. And that's really tough. So I think something I'm really proud of is that, we, as a CEO, you're kind of given stewardship of this thing called an organisation that someone else spun up probably, and it's just kind of given to you. It's like adopting a dog. You're like, here it is. This was its life. Now it's up to you, and you have to feed it and keep it alive and walk it and do all these things. And you just have to be you with the organisation. And it's been a real challenge. And I think for a first CEO role, I'd maybe say, like, to the question kind of what would you have asked at interview, I'm not sure anyone would have had this answer for me then. So hindsight's not especially helpful for me in this one, but kind of, like does it go? Like, are we cool? So I think being able to stick with that, and also having, I know we've spoken a lot about kind of whatever your language is for it. My language is kind of getting the team in the green from the red, that kind of place of psychological safety. If you can make people content at work, then like 40% of their waking time is a great, joyous time. And for me as well, that's a reason I go to work every day, because I believe that I have what it takes to make that happen for people, even when it's been tough. And so I think, being able to kind of just keep showing up and, in that toolbox, like take the resilience bit out and bring it every day. And to leave to leave something lasting that means that there's now muscle memory in the organisation for things to run, feels really great. And it's a different story than it would be if it were a larger organisation or a different organisation. But I think that's one part of the puzzle that you don't really get to choose or control, even if you ask all the right questions at interview.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Saba?
The thing I'm most proud of is in the last, 3 years, almost, that I've been the CEO of the Advocacy Academy, is that I've rebuilt trust in the institution. When I became CEO a few years ago, the staff team had reduced to like 2 people. I often refer to it as like 2 people and a hat. I'm not really sure why, but I think it made sense at the time. We had been blacklisted by a number of campaigning groups. We'd lost a lot of trust between us and the membership with some of the young people that we worked with. It's something that we sort of talk about regularly. We still sort of think about too. And there was definitely a moment about 6 months in where I was not sure if I really wanted to do this. It's a big challenge to take on, to very much take on the actions of take on something that you haven't had control over, right? And decide that you're going to push it through. And I just feel really proud of that trust. And for me, trust comes in lots of different ways. It's trust for people who look at the organisation and think this is exactly a place that I want to work. It's a place where I can bring my values. It's a place where I can achieve impact. We've grown from 2 people and that mysterious hat to 19 people now, and a much broader group of contractors. We've got trust comes from the form of like funders, foundations, individuals who continue to like look at what we're doing, believe in our long, I often like to put it like, you know, what the complex vision of what it means to politicize a group of young people in South London, and the importance that that has in protecting our democracy at large. And I'm proud to say that we've like tripled our income in that time. And then for me, at the heart of that is that what that then means for us as an organisation and the young people who then have the trust to be able to work with us. One of the things that really made me smile was like we had a tough time coming out of our old building. Our old landlord definitely was ready to start making money, having given us peppercorn rent for some time. And we had like people across the community, our young people, coming up to our door and saying, you know, are they kicking you out? Do we need to picket the landlord? What is his address? Where do we need to go? And we were like, oh no, please don't. No, it's all good. It's all good. Like, stand down. You don't need to do anything. It's all good. It's all above board. But that independent desire to protect the institution in that period of time is something that is so beautiful and meaningful to me. As is the individual trust that I still have with some of the young people that we work with. Just now, earlier, before I was coming here, I was messaging one of our most amazing campaigners. Her name is Jamar. She won a BAFTA for a film, which is What Do You Mean I Can't Change the World? You can find it on YouTube. It's a beautiful, beautiful 10-minute film that she created. She's currently working on a campaign called Collective Punishment to provide care for families who have members in secure estate. And she has been desperately trying to find a job. We sort of very much, she was looking in the charity sector, worked with her to sort of work that through. And it was just a special moment to be like, one of the first people she contacted was the Advocacy Academy to tell us how she was doing. And that is a special moment of trust as well. I think that currency of what it means to be able to build a movement, to be able to build something that creates long-lasting impact has to come from that. And the complexity of how you build that, I'm still not quite sure if I could articulate it fully, but it's definitely those pieces. And even when things are hard, and they are hard now in the sector, it's important to be able to measure that and know that, and to know that that is a foundation that is stronger than most other things that you can get.
Thanks, Saba.
This is a little bit of a hard question for me to answer because I was only in that role for 5 months. But there are a couple of things. I remember in the beginning, because I talk very much about joy, and I love that you said I'm joy and mission driven. And so I remember starting and talking about joy, and someone saying, journalists don't do joy. And I'm me being like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I mean, we report about such horrible things, we just don't do joy. And I said, but there has to be joy in everything. Joy is resistance. I mean, if you're a part of marginalized communities, the only way you continue is because you have joy. If you cannot find joy in what you do, you cannot continue. And so one of the things I'm proud of is that by the time I left, there was this sense that, wait, actually, no, we deserve joy. The other piece is that one of the comments that had been made is that we've complained about these issues and nothing was ever done. It's been years and nothing ever changed. And so I felt quite proud that it changed. And so that to me was a big deal. I'm going to cheat a little bit and say, because I've had 25-year career, actually 28, I'm old, before this role, and the role before it wasn't the CO, but it was the leadership role, and I had a larger team at that role. And one of the things that seems like a little thing was that, I headed public policy for Facebook for Africa, Middle East, and Turkey, and I was the first employee in that who covered Africa, and the team grew. And one of the things, and I think this is relevant across the sector as well, is that people say when you're looking for qualified people or to build a team, like, oh, it's just so hard to find people of color in this space. And I find that ridiculous and just stupid on so many different levels. And one of the things I did there is the team was all it was serving Africa, Middle East, and Turkey. The entire team were people from across Africa, Middle East, and Turkey. And I also knew that I was a certain type of African in the sense I was born in the States, and I have an American accent, and I went to American schools, and so they saw me as like a good, safe African, good. And so I deliberately filled my teams with people who were from across the continent, from across the Middle East, born in Palestine, born in Lebanon, born in Saudi, born in Nigeria. And so that team still exists, and that team is even bigger, and it's led by an incredible person. And one of the things I'm proudest of is that I built that team is even better now, and that I created leaders in that team. So that team is totally fine and is even better without me. And that, to me, is such a huge accomplishment, to leave a legacy of leaders, and particularly leaders of color, who prior to that, people said didn't exist.
Thank you so much. And that kind of leads me to my last question. I want to ask so many questions, but I know I have to bring in everybody else, which is the advice for emerging leaders. So you just touched on that in the way that you've created leaders behind you, but I think everyone in the room would love to hear what's your advice for emerging leaders, but especially people who come from underrepresented groups, so your own journeys, but what is the one piece of advice that you've gotten that you'd want to pass on, or one thing that you've learned that you'd want to pass on? And maybe we can start this way and go around.
Okay, I'll start by saying, and I say this whenever I give advice, is that advice is often more about the person who's giving it than you, and you have to think about whether that person's journey is a journey you want to be on, and if it's not a journey you want to be on, then the advice means nothing. So that's the caveat. One of the biggest things for me is being exactly myself. And so the older I've gotten, I turned 50 a month ago, which I'm super excited about. The older I've gotten, the more myself I am. And by that I mean, particularly for people of color, particularly for women, particularly for African, there's this sense that we'll assimilate, like be as much like the norm, and the norm is, I guess, is usually white men, as possible, and that's the more successful you'll be. For me, as the older I get, the more I want to be exactly myself. And for a couple of reasons. One, if you're not exactly yourself, what's meant for you does not recognize you because you're pretending to be someone else. There's also, in my view, a confidence that comes from standing in your power as yourself. And it doesn't mean that life is easy. I was at a panel that was about moral courage. And all the panelists got up and they talked about hard decisions they'd made, and there's always a happy ending. I'm here to say that there is often not a happy ending, that moral courage sometimes requires you to be okay with there not being a happy ending. For me, and it's not advice, I'll just say my sort of story has been, I have felt happiest and most confident when I have been most aligned with mission and purpose, and when I have followed what I think is the right thing to do. It doesn't mean that there's been a standard happy ending, but I have felt most happy for myself when I've done that. So I think for me, the biggest advice is know yourself as soon as possible. And again, it's not advice, it's just what I've done. Know yourself as soon as possible and follow that. And also that other people's ideas of success may not align with what yours are. And for me, having the courage to define success in a way that made sense to me made me freest.
Thank you.
I think very similarly, I'm not sure if it's advice so much as something that I've learned for myself that I'm happy to share with everybody else. I think there's something for me about as the more power that you gain in your career as an emerging leader, there is oftentimes this tension between that I've experienced about either it is a hill that you die on, or you are morally compromised forevermore, and that there is no gray area in between that you can exist within. And I want to name that in the world I talk all the time, the nature of our training is the world as it is versus the world as it should be. The world as it should be is being created every day by the people in this panel, I'm sure by the people in the audience as well. But it does not exist yet. And until it exists, there is a huge spectrum between those two polar places. And the faster that more people become, with different backgrounds, with different experiences, with lived experience, become comfortable existing with complexity in that spectrum, the faster we will get to the world as it should be. But that is hard. I will not pretend that it is easy. There isn't happy, glory endings to like the life as a CEO, as far as I can tell. But like, there is, but what there is purpose and intention, and like conflict, yes, but conflict knowing that it is driving towards something better. And like accepting that reality allows us, as with any risks and any complexity, to then prepare for it. So if you want that, if you believe that you are the right person for that room, prepare yourself for it, get your community, whatever you need to like move yourself through that, accepting that you will be inhabiting some sort of gray area for yourself or from other people's perspectives, and whatever that will mean for you.
I had one ready and then I had another thought because everyone's saying such amazing things. So the bonus bit first is learn to tell the difference between encouragement, which is what someone says when they just really want the best for you, and persuasion, which is what they say to you when they want you to do the thing that they want you to do so they don't have to do it, right? So that might be, you'd be great. Yeah, you should definitely go for that role. You should do this thing. Or I think you've got all these amazing skills. I think you'll be fantastic, whatever you do, and this opportunity is amazing for you. Okay. I was definitely encouraged to take my current job, not persuaded, for kind of full disclosure. And what I was going to say, which I think is always part of the same thing, which is wherever you go, there you are. The first day you rock up to be the CEO, just because you've bought a new pair of trainers for your new cool job with the young people, which is exactly what I did. I'm not in the civil service anymore. I'm wearing my trainers, wearing my blue jeans. Like, you get there and you sit at your desk and you still know all the same stuff you knew yesterday. And you just have to kind of try and rearrange the alphabet blocks in your head in a different order to do different things. So, like, whether the job is a CEO job or whether it's a big, shiny job in an even bigger organisation where you're not the chief exec, it doesn't matter. Like, if you look me up on LinkedIn, you'll see I've got all sorts of weird and wacky job titles in there. I have never, ever read the title of a job and thought, I'm going to apply for that job. I have read the role person spec thing and gone, okay, if I did that every day for a week, how would I feel at 5 p.m. on a Friday? Because I know I'm me and I can't be anybody else. So that's the real kind of test. And just like all of the things in your life that help you know yourself, whether it is lying on a yoga mat, whether it is going down the gym and chucking some weights around, whether it's walking the dog at 5 o'clock on a Friday morning, whatever the things you do that help you know yourself better is the thing that is going to make you better between 9 and 5, because you can only be you and you can only do the things that you do. And if you're in any sort of role that involves people, you've got to be a person. So yeah, I think don't think that it's about job titles and governance structures and stuff, because it's, we're all just a human at the end of the day.
Not sure what to add to all of that. I mean, I've never gone for a job. I've always gone for a cause. And I think that's the thing that's really steadied me through all the turbulent waters of being in the charity sector right now. It's about the cause, it's about the change, and it's about the impact. And I do the job I do to try and achieve that. And I think that for me is a really important guiding light, because things do get hard and they do get difficult, and you do entirely operate in many shades of grey. Nothing is ever entirely black and white, apart from the reason that you're there. And I think you really have to hold on to that. And just accept that, oftentimes there won't be a happy ending, and you've got to get really comfortable with that discomfort, and accept that is just part of your job, and that is why, in part, why you've signed up for it, to bear those responsibilities in order to allow the environment and your colleagues to continue to progress on the cause. So I think that's for me been really important, learning that most things are grey in leadership apart from the cause, and getting comfortable with discomfort.
What to add? I feel like, I'm not in a position to give advice, but just thing I learned is to be genuine and be yourself and enjoy yourself while doing whatever you are doing. Because the same, I grew up in a different country, a religious minority, conservative minority, and in my head, success or being a CEO had a certain image. And I, as you said, like I tried to assemble and fit into this image. So when I was applying for jobs here in UK, I started using my husband's name because I felt he's Irish, so I felt like, yeah, having a foreign name will help me get that job better. And now I feel like, no, I want to say my name is Najwa Abdallah, and if you can't pronounce it and you can't accept it, then or even celebrate it, then it's your problem, not mine. So as you said, like the more I'm getting older, I'm more going back to my roots and sticking to those roots. And also, while you're climbing up a ladder, make sure that you're bringing other people up with you and not doing it only for yourself.
Sometimes there's a sense that there is a particular sector or a particular job, and that is the righteous thing. So you have to decide, or I've decided, that I have to decide for myself which brand I'm most comfortable with, and in which space I feel I can have the most impact, and that's where I'm going to go. But this sense that there's like one space where it's completely, that it just doesn't exist, and I know I'm quite old to be just discovering this, and I'm not saying I just discovered it, but like for me, it was this sense of, oh, okay, where can I navigate best? Where are my skills most aligned with? Because it's going to be that this type of thing is going to be everywhere, and I can't avoid it. So.
That is a perfect time. I would love to ask you so many more questions, and I've had the privilege of asking you many before, but I'm going to open it up to the audience because I know there'll be loads of questions. Who wants to go first? Yeah, on the right.
Thank you. I have to say I came with about 20 questions, and you've answered all of them because it was the most rich and engaging and amazing panel. So I just want to commend you for an amazing session, and also thank you for your incredible feminist leadership. It really was so inspiring listening to all of you. So thank you for that. If I may ask one question, though, and it's a little bit... Is it Ebele? Do I say that correctly? Ebele. You said something, obviously you shared a really difficult experience. And what I guess you found was that the prerequisites for your success and your ability to have an impact in the way you wanted were not there. So my question really is, what resources do you draw on to reach those conclusions? Because sometimes we, as people fighting for a mission that we care really a lot about, we tend to go on a lot longer than we probably should. So how do we make those judgments about when it's time to stop and say, no, this is not doable, or it's not doable on terms I'm comfortable with? I mean, it's incredibly courageous that you made that decision, but, how did you find that courage, and what resources did you draw on to do that?
That's a great question, but I should say two things. So one, I actually kind of went to the board with kind of an ultimatum, as in, if this is not, if this can't be here, then it doesn't make any sense. But one of the things that was keeping me there is the extent to which I had already connected with staff. And so I will tell you, like 3 months in, I was like, this ain't it. Like, I just didn't think, but I was like, oh my gosh, I feel such a responsibility to staff. I have I'm very, very grateful. I have a huge squad. Like, I have multiple people who are like friends, who are colleagues, who are in senior positions. And they sat down with me, I would say like a month, and they're like, you gotta go, you gotta get out, you gotta go. But I was like, no, I feel really connected to staff, I can't really, but it was a combination of their advice and counsel. But I also was in a position where the choice was taken away from me, and I have to be honest and say I was a little bit relieved, because I felt like I wouldn't have left because I felt so responsible to people. So I'm not saying that I have it right, but I was clear about the circumstances under which I could stay, if that made any sense. And so because I have a very strong sense of like right and wrong and like ethics. So to me, if there weren't very specific things that to me aligned with ethics and what would make it better, I said I wasn't going to stay. And to me, that's experience. Like I think if you had talked to me 20 years ago, I wouldn't have even known that those were things I should be thinking about. And quite candidly, now I've learned from this that there are very specific things I will ask before I enter a space, because I got into the space, and now in retrospect, there's so many questions I could have asked that even if that I would have known better. Having said that, I regret nothing. I learned so much from the experience. I connected with amazing humans, and I learned a lot from it. But that's a very long way of saying that in this case, I was clear on like what my red lines were, my boundaries, but it was other people, like my little board of directors, who were like, yo, you gotta have this. And then it was also the decision being taken out of my hands because I felt a little bit too emotionally connected to people to like cut the cord, if that made any sense.
I want to just maybe build on what the two of you have just said. Like, one of the things that I've noticed, as well as like in the moments when I am struggling with a decision, the first question I oftentimes ask myself is like, have I asked for things to be different? I think that there are a lot of staff members that I've worked with, a lot of young people that I work with, and the question is like, do you have a route do you have an understanding of what you need to be different? Or like, do you believe that you can ask for things to be different? Do you believe you can demand that from your board? Can you give an ultimatum to your board? And I think a lot of people don't lean into that space. And for me, there's a question in there of like, hey, what would you actually want? And I'm not sure we give ourselves enough space to demand that for ourselves, and then accept whatever happens afterwards, right? But, yeah.
I think you've all talked a lot about the challenges the sector have faced, particularly over the last couple of years post-COVID, and the challenge you're all facing, and running organisations can be incredibly lonely as CEOs. So I'd be curious to hear, how do you get your energy? How do you keep positive for those around you and your staff when the world is quite difficult at the moment?
Do you want to start? Yeah, I think, so for me, when I've said really clearly what my priorities are and what I'm going to do, and whether it's like your manager or your board, whoever it is in your kind of dynamic, are like, yeah, they're the right things. Go have a go at those. I'm like, great, game on. We've got a handshake. We all know what we're here for. And clear is kind. Brene Brown, right? Clear is kind. Unclear is unkind. Absolute gold. It's brilliant. And it just clears so many things up. Because then if I'm struggling, what is it that's not right? And so the thing, in answer to your question, I'm basically a plant, or like I just need water and sunshine. Plants don't need exercise, but I'm a bit of a spaniel. Like my brain definitely needs to like be let out for a run. I learned that quite late in life, and it has just genuinely changed my life, which is also quite bad because it also for a while turned me into a triathlete, which is ridiculously expensive and I wouldn't recommend. But I think there's definitely just something about tuning into your body, because stress is a physical thing, right? And I'm a very kind of cerebral person, and actually just going like, actually, look, you've got a machine here, you need to look after it. And part of that's connection with other people. I'm an introvert as well. So, working out what that means for you, it's really important. And I think taking the time in kind of peacetime to build habits and get into rhythms, like know what your rhythms are, so that it's in the muscle memory. So if I've mentioned muscle memory about 8 times today. I used to be a singer, and it's just kind of the way that you think about things. But if you know how you can tune into that, you then know when things are off, so you know when to ask for help, or you know when to kind of say, hang on, we'd agreed on this thing and something's not right, and it's not me. So kind of being able to diagnose, is it a me problem or a someone else problem, can really help you, I think, with clarity in that, and that helps me a lot.
Najwa, can you come on this, please? Yeah.
A bit of different answer to yours, which is connecting with your body, but also connecting with your feelings, and let these feelings manifest. Because a lot of times we were asked, like, as a leader, you should not express anger or sadness or upset. But how can we not, with witnessing everything that is happening around us, especially in the recent months, like, it's normal that we feel anger, we feel helpless, we feel frustrated, and allow these feelings to come to the surface and express them. Because if you release these feelings, then you don't end up in this like loop of between feelings and thoughts, and like end up in like repeating the same things and keeping them for so long. And also acknowledging that the staff also have the right to express these feelings and create this safe space. AMNAM, it means safe, and that's what our aim is, creating safe space for psychological support for traumatized people, but also for our staff. We want to make sure that our organization is a safe space for them, and continuing to acknowledge what's happening in the world and its impact on us, and allowing for these conversations, especially like now what's happening in Gaza. And if you allow me to give a shout to my colleagues, Randa, her family are in Rafah at the moment. And it's okay that we cry. It's okay that we feel angry and bitter and sad and upset. And have these conversations and make sure we're checking on each other and helping each other and being there for each other.
Thank you, Najwa. Amy, there's a question here in front.
Hi, thank you. That was really, really inspiring, and thank you for giving your time and sharing your expertise and your thoughts. My question is about this balance between being vulnerable, showing weakness, being human ultimately, but also being confident, being a powerhouse. Buck stops with you. You know, in every senior position, we sort of have that trade-off. But as a CEO, ultimately, the buck does stop with you. So could you explain how you find that balance, or maybe give an example where you found that difficult to really show that emotion, to be vulnerable and be comfortable with that, because you're so easily said and so hard to achieve. And to know where that balance really is, because I think for some CEOs I've worked with, they found that difficult. They found that really hard to be crying, for example, or showing emotions. From the work where I work, similarly and in a similar context, I've seen a real shift recently. I think it's become more acceptable, perhaps, to, especially among women, to show that they are ultimately human. But it'd be really nice to hear from you where you've found that hard, or where you feel you've managed that well. Thank you.
I don't know if I manage it well, but I do both things. I think in my mind, I sort of disaggregate varying kinds of decisions. So, you know, if I'm having to make particular kinds of decisions, and in my, you know, and I sort of decide that actually I need to be strong for the team, and they need, you know, it's going to be a tough ride. It's going to be hard to achieve whatever it is. I will try and be what I think the team needs, and I think that's my default. Whether that's right or wrong, I will always try and be what the team needs. But in sort of softer moments where we're sharing, where we're coming together, where we're speaking, where we're informal, you know, I will talk about, you know, friends and family in the Middle East who are going through difficult times. I will talk about, you know, my children. I will talk about things that are difficult personally. And I think that is really important, because if you are a human being, then I think that allows other people to be a human being as well and feel comfortable in their workspace. But I think I do operate a bit of a binary when I have decisions to be made that are quite tough. I think I don't show that side of myself. But there are colleagues that I will show that side of myself to. So our leadership team, or sometimes parts of our board, to my chair. But it's a really difficult one to get right. And I think you're right. It's really important to show the human, vulnerable side of yourself, because when you take on the mantle of the CEO, you know, people forget that you are a human being. You are sort of, you know, someone to be respected, somebody to be feared, somebody to be like somebody who shouldn't ever get it wrong. And actually, you really do need to humanise yourself, because it just gives permission to everybody else to be real too.
Thank you, Farah.
Can I actually provide maybe a slightly different perspective to that? I think that it's important to make the distinction between vulnerability and honesty. I think it's really important to be open, to be honest, to be like where you are at. I think that given what we are witnessing in the world right now, it is, you have to be able to be open and honest about, you know, what we are seeing, and to be able to bring that and talk about it in the workplace. But for me personally, I don't feel comfortable or at ease when I am emotional in the workplace. And I want to feel okay making that decision. And if that decision is not to be vulnerable with my team, I want to be okay with that. And for me, part of what it means to have that openness and honesty is saying, well, I want to be able to, I have I'm an introvert. Like, I don't want to be using all my emotional energy with sharing that in the workplace. I have my friends. I want to be able to save that for my friends, for my family. But I can be absolutely honest with you about where I'm at. And I think I've had to have this conversation with the team, who have actually, because of the kind of organization that we are, have expected and demanded a level of emotional vulnerability that I am not prepared to give. And I want to be able to hold that boundary for myself at work. And I think it's important that I am also able to do so as a human being in the workplace that also has rights, that isn't just a role that I'm filling that as this mysterious hat that I keep referring to. But there is something about that, which is, I want to make that distinction about different workplaces and their cultures will demand different things. And that also should be managed by the individual.
Thank you, Saba. I think we have time for one more question.
Thanks so much. And I think, thanks, Shivani, you've asked some excellent questions. And I'm really sorry I have two. And firstly, just to the panel, I loved hearing from each of you. I mean, you've been so candid. So I hope you'll be candid with these next ones. I think my first question is, I think you asked a bit about this, Shivani, but what were you afraid of taking on these roles? There's no kind of blueprint, right, on how to be a CEO, how to be a senior leader. So how did you even figure out what to be afraid of, and what were you afraid of? And then my second question is, and this could be for any point in your career, not necessarily a CEO role, but kind of going into an organization that seemed so complex and had so many challenges, and the job seemed so daunting. What was the thing that convinced you to take on that responsibility? Thanks.
I know this is going to make me sound a certain kind of way, but I think I'm a cockeyed optimist, and so I'm not afraid. That doesn't mean that when the thing happens, I'm like, oh, this is not good. But I've never gone into anything and been afraid of it, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, like one of the things, there's an Audre Lorde quote that says, I'm deliberate and afraid of nothing. And I have that on my Instagram, because that actually does describe me. It doesn't mean I don't make mistakes. I make so many mistakes, and afterward we laugh about it, but I'm not generally afraid of things. And then what was the second question? There was the fear, and then what was the second question?
About what made you choose the kind of...
Oh, so for me, I love complex things. And so for this, it was two things. This particular role was about voice. So my roles at Yahoo and Facebook were about voice. Like, how does the internet create platforms for voice? So I was policy at both of those places, human rights policy. So how do you allow these? I'm very, very interested in particularly how marginalized communities are able to tell our own stories. And so this notion of being at a journalism organization where people are allowed to tell their own stories. So that was one. Two, that there was sort of a transition, that there was something around creating a different culture, and then three, that there was an interest in earned revenue, and figuring out. So that to me was a very interesting problem, because you're in a civil society space and also in a journalism space, which is in sort of a bad position. So how could I create something that was generative in a field where there wasn't? So yeah, and then being a leader of a team that was faced, I love this thing of how do you create psychological safety for people who are doing work that is incredibly difficult. So this notion of being able to be a leader and holding space and creating an environment that was best optimized for people who are doing that work, those were all things that were very exciting to me.
Najwa, can I ask you to come in, and then I'll hand over to Ryan.
Yeah, for me, it was the alignment with AMNA's values and mission, like the commitment to the mission, because growing up in a war zone and working for 25 years in war zones, I wish there was the same organization for me growing up that helped me to deal with my traumas and heal. So that was the drive for it. And the fear, yes, I was very scared of failing, because growing up also to be driven by society and family to be very competitive, because you had to be the first in the class. The second is not good enough, because then you don't get scholarship and then you can't get education. That pushed me to the extreme. Like, I don't see things in gray. I see them very much black and white, and it's something I'm learning, that things are in all shades. It's not black and white. It's not like either you're the best CEO or the worst CEO. There is in between, and I'm training myself to be average CEO is okay.
That's not the case at all. Thank you all so much, and thank you for your questions. I know you'll all have more, but I'm going to hand over to Ryan to respect your time and close the event.
So great to see everyone. Thank you so much for the time. Thank you to the panelists. Yeah, it's really been so amazing. And I was asked to do a very quick summary of the reflections, but I don't feel like anything I'll say is brief because I feel like we just heard so many amazing points, so many things that I feel like will be excellent to unpack later. So just a very quick note to go eat Issa's cake. Issa's wonderful carrot cake, have a little bit, more obviously discussions, follow up with everyone too. I did write down some key themes and was furiously scribbling because there was just so many things thrown around. I think, this journey to becoming a CEO, navigating the challenges, really this sort of impact and purpose, and how do you find joy within those spaces, and often kind of navigating the boundaries of leaning into agency, but also leaning into, the boundaries which can come with agency and just the leadership structures too within organizations. One idea too, this idea of leaning into growth moments when they present themselves and really paving individuality, but also kind of navigating the dynamics through those challenges too, and really asking for help and knowing when to ask for help, which I think is a constant learning challenge for all of us, for sure. And then this idea of really being scrappy and persistent with change, so delving into the details and really pushing for transparency in all aspects of leadership and all aspects of your position. And I think just some kind of final concluding thoughts. Moments of trust are really crucial in terms of the complexity of building movements, and an idea to just continue to lean into that. And then really, I loved what you said, Ebele, about joy is resistance. So I think there's so many more things to unpack, so many more places to really continue to unpack those sparks of joy. But thank you, and I'll pass it to Shivani.
Thank you all again. Just a round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank you so much. But also, before we release you to carrot cake and drinks and nibbles of all sorts, I also wanted to say a big thank you to the team who's put this all together. Every single carefully placed glass, table, seat, invite that's gone out, lots of late nights and early mornings. So thank you, Ryan. Say hello, Ryan. Ibi at the back, Sasha, and Isabella. So thank you all so much for putting all this together. Thank you all for coming. Please do make your way to drinks, more conversations, and lots more questions. Thank you so much.